Hi, you're listening to Coffee and Culture. We're on Talk 1260 and 103.7 KTRC, streaming at santafe.com. My name is Matthew Chase Daniel, and I am your host every other week. And today I'm talking with Dr. Wendy Johnson, who is a doctor, a physician, and more recently an author, and just wrote a book called Kinship Medicine: Cultivating Interdependence to Heal the Earth and Ourselves. And I just read the book yesterday and today, and I went through it fast, but it's very inspiring and interesting, and it's both a combination of looking at our past as humans and our ideas for our future as humans, but peppered with a lot of personal examples of life in your garden in Chupadero, and life and with the Zapatistas in Mexico and in Chile, and other writers with examples from all over the world. So it really draws you in and grabs you, and it makes you feel part of a larger web of connectedness, which is what it's all about.
Yeah.
So welcome, Wendy.
That's great. That's great to hear. I'm glad. It's just trickling out in the world right now. And like you said, it's the first book I've written. So it's a interesting and sort of awe-inspiring thing to kind of see how people react to it and see if kind of your intended effect is what people are getting from it, or other things that maybe you didn't intend also. So it's not even the release yet, but it's been a great experience just seeing how the words have their ripple effects.
Yeah. So you came to Santa Fe for your residency out of medical school, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. I had done a year of my medical school in Chile, in southern Chile, in a town called Concepcion at University of Concepcion. And I had learned to speak Spanish fairly okay there and wanted to continue both getting better with Spanish, but also making sure that I'd acquired the skill so that I could serve a Spanish-speaking population. And so wanted to go to a place where there was more of a Spanish-speaking population, although there is a significant Spanish-speaking population in Cleveland, but wanted to go someplace else. Also, the West, for family medicine, and this is still true today, but it's hard. A lot of places in the East where there are a lot of specialists, it's hard to get the training to do everything that I wanted to do, including delivering babies, which I did for a while. And so I wanted to go to a program where I could get a more broadly based educational experience. So I came to initially University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, and then they started the residency in Santa Fe at La Familia. And so I came up here. I was the first resident to start that residency at La Familia.
Yeah. And La Familia is sort of based on this model. You described it in the book, sort of pioneered by this one guy. Tell me.
Jack Geiger, Dr. Jack Geiger. Yeah, it's the community health center movement. So La Familia is one of about 1,200 community health centers. I'm working at another one up in northern New Mexico right now called El Centro Family Health. And there are a lot in New Mexico. We're lucky, but it was started in the late 70s, kind of part of LBJ's war on poverty. And it was the brainchild of a doctor, Dr. Jack Geiger, who had seen this model in South Africa as a medical student. He did a rotation at this clinic in South Africa, which even during apartheid days had an integrated staff, had attention to this, what we now call the social determinants of health of patients. So did things like helped families get latrines and running water and food and all the other things that are so important for health. And he came back to the United States and he saw places like the Mississippi Delta during that time in the 1970s, where a lot of the Black population was living in conditions that were similar to South Africa, without running water, without, with just outhouses, things like that. And so he started 2 of the first health centers on that model, that medical care can be so much more and really address our health much more holistically if we look at those social determinants of health,
Yeah.
food, water, sanitation, employment. They had a community farm that and employment programs in the Mississippi Delta Community Health Center that they started. And so I was lucky enough to know Jack. He has passed now, but he was, I consider him, a big mentor of mine, and he was very active in the civil rights movement. There's actually a really great This American Life, if you look it up, about him as a teenager living with an actor in Harlem and when he was a high school student, and just how he got really into a big player in the civil rights movement and just a great, great guy. And so his initial 2 community health centers have bloomed into 1,200.
Wow.
And they serve everybody, depending, if you don't have insurance. Still, let's keep our fingers crossed. If you're an immigrant, you can get seen. If you're undocumented, you can get seen. That could change any minute. We're all waiting for that shoe to drop right now.
So I've heard.
Yeah. So it's a great model that's getting harder and harder to really practice. Practicing in northern New Mexico, people have such intense problems and need. The healthcare system is just very threadbare in northern New Mexico. We have really lack of nurses, doctors, all pharmacies now are closing. It's very hard to provide healthcare to this population. And then, the poverty, the lack of transportation, the other social issues, addiction issues, is very difficult. But this model really attempts to address things holistically.
Yeah. And also you say in your book, a lot of it has to do with like the medical system as it exists mostly now is all about billable hours, and there's not a lot of time for people telling deeper stories of their life. And you say, 80% of what determines our health is not medical disease oriented things. And our bodies aren't machines.
Right.
And having these health clinics like La Familia or other models where it's not just physicians diagnosing problems of the machine, but it's more looking at something more holistically and sort of a web of community.
Yeah, I give the example of, we have screening tests for depression, and they're about, did you feel hopeless in the last 2 weeks? Did you feel like harming yourself? Did you feel like you couldn't get out of bed? There's a screening tool that has these questions.
And you check off yes or no on
and
each
you check
one.
off yes or no, and you get a score, right?
Uh-huh.
But it doesn't ask why you feel that way in any of the questions. It's just asking how you feel. So it's completely, you can be following the guidelines 100%. If you go through the checklist, if people score over the threshold, you diagnose them with depression and you put them on an antidepressant. You can do all of that and get 100% marks on all your billing and all your quality measures, and never, ever, ever ask a patient, well, why are you depressed?
Right.
And so if the patient is depressed because, like many patients I have, they just, have a patient who found his daughter, who's a teenager, dead of an overdose a few days before. There's patients that are struggling financially and just worry about that every day. And there are patients that have suffered, other kinds of trauma of sexual abuse or other kinds of physical abuse. And sure, I can refer them to a therapist, and that's part of the treatment as well. But there's not a lot of therapists in northern New Mexico,
Right.
So that might not be a referral that's, I can feel good, I referred you, but it doesn't really happen. So in that situation, I'm sitting there in front of you, and I can ask you that story, and us connecting on that story is therapeutic. And if you tell me, oh, it's because I'm having all these trouble in my life, I don't really see personally how prescribing you with a medication is treating the right patient. You know?
Right.
The patient that needs to be treated is society at large, that's
Right.
creating these traumas and these problems.
And you listening to them telling the story is sort of a first step into some sort of healing awareness that like, hey, that's really hard what you just went through. Of course you're feeling horrible and hard to get out of bed in the morning.
Right.
And what other resource do you know, who are your friends and family that you can reach out to? Or if you don't have that, how can you become a part of a community? Or like you say in your book, go for a walk in the, in the forest. We have to go to break. We'll be right back. I'm Matthew Chase Daniel talking to Dr. Wendy Johnson, whose new book, Kinship Medicine, is just coming out now. You're back listening to Coffee and Culture on Talk 1260 and 103.7 KTRC, streaming at santafe.com. There's also podcasts of past shows that I've done at, if you look on any podcast platform for Coffee and Culture with Matthew Chase Daniel, you'll find it, or you can find it on my website, which is chasedaniel.com under podcast. And I only talk to interesting people about interesting things. So it's always worth doing. Today I'm talking with Dr. Wendy Johnson, who's been in Santa Fe for decade, 20?
Like 15 years now.
Yeah.
I mean, a little bit longer if you count the first stint.
Yeah,
but,
so you were here for your residency at med school, and then you left, but then you came back as the director of La Familia.
Right,
for a
as the
number of
medical
years.
director
Yeah.
for about 10 years, and then worked for about another year as just a family physician.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have you in town. I met Wendy through Chip Thomas, who's another physician who's in Arizona, but was here installing this big mural on the Lena Wall. And Wendy came to help do painting and installation of repasting and
Chip's an old friend. I initially came out here right before I moved back in 2011. 516 Arts in Albuquerque did a big street art exhibit that year. And
we did a huge install high up on a building downtown.
So I assisted on that, and Chip's a good old friend for many years, and so that was just at the beginning of his career as an artist, and it's kind of blown up.
Yeah, he's doing great. Mm-hmm. And it's nice because reading your book, it reminds me of how we met, which is that we were there installing this mural, Chip and I, and sort of put out the word to friends and on social media and stuff. If anyone wants to come help, come on by. These are the times. We got some soda and some burritos, and this sort of sent, and a lot of people came and helped, and it was a really wonderful feeling of community and generosity, and reciprocal generosity. And there were people there who, like a couple, drove up from Las Cruces for the day to help because they loved Chip's work and they wanted to meet him and learn and help. And that was just so heartwarming and life-giving, which is sort of what your book is about. It's like we need to extend ourselves in community and not live so much of our contemporary life is in these little separate bubbles. And
or just online even, and not in real life. And it was so beautiful during the day that I was helping out. People, not just the people who came to volunteer, certainly, and meeting interesting people who are volunteering, but also just people driving by and stopping. What are you doing? And, the issue was around Los Alamos and, so plutonium and contamination and just being able to educate folks about the issue.
Yeah.
And at the same time build community, and that just it doesn't happen online. I mean, there's good things about online. We can certainly make connections online, but the real life connections that we make with each other, again, are much better for our health. That's how we evolved as human beings. We're communal kind of creatures.
Yeah.
We're more like bees, you know.
Living in our hives.
Yeah, well, we're bees that need the hive, you know.
Yeah.
We need that family, community, chosen family, whatever. We need those physical connections with each other. Physical touch, even, you know,
Yeah.
is really important. You definitely can't get that online. So although we can make common cause online, organize online, there's lots of good things that we can do. It also devolves quickly, because when you can't see a person and look them in the eye, it's much easier to vilify them, to say things you would never say to a person in person, and
Yeah.
and it's not a substitute.
Yeah. No, I just find even doing these interviews, we were talking before we started about doing them sometimes on Zoom and sometimes in person. And in person, there's so many more sort of cues that we get between each other, sitting across the table from each other, that move the conversation along. And Zoom is better than on the phone, and in person is better than on Zoom. You know, there's all
Yeah.
these sort of gradations of that.
Right.
And you're also, in your book, you talk about how our human population used to be much more rural and agricultural, but rural, and now is much more, you know, people are moving to cities and people are leaving the countryside, and which is interesting in terms of what you're saying in terms of that physical. When you said hive, it made me, or I said hive, it made me think of that, like communities like New York City or Los Angeles, where you have this density of people living together in close proximity that you can't avoid.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily, but it's losing a connection with nature. So you have both the urbanification of populations, the internetification of populations, and the lack of connection of populations. And I guess in 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, more rural populations are living in extended family groups and communities that really depend on each other in a very real way for survival. To keep those.
Yeah, we have in New Mexico, you know, we're sort of lucky in that we still have a lot of those roots. You know, I talk a lot about the acequia system. I'm on an acequia, I'm a Parciante and an acequia in Chupadero. And that shared common resource of the water and the ditches and a whole community needing to take care of that. And it's not something that's legislated at the state level or even really the local level. It's really, really controlled by each individual little acequia commission.
Right. And the Parciante is our participant or a parcel holder or whatever that word translates exactly as. It's the people who are a part of it.
Right.
Who are, and you have an obligation. You elect a mayordomo, or they're appointed, I don't know how, but all the people are obligated to go out and help clean the ditch and maintain it and manage it, or hire someone to, if you can't get out there. But it's a communal system that's been around for hundreds of years, and everyone depends on everyone else, because if the ditch only works as it crosses your property, but it doesn't work upstream, it's no good to you.
No, and there's this idea that has been promulgated about the tragedy of the commons. This idea that if we have a communally held resource, that human beings are going to take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea is actually a myth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been propagated by people who don't want the commons. And right now we're having this issue of selling off all our public lands, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly that group of people. What happened in England back in feudal times, there was always a common area where the serfs and everyone could use for foraging and hunting and grazing and things like that.
Right.
And then there was the enclosure of the commons, because the lords decided, oh, well, I want to be the only one that hunts for deer on this property, and I don't want, the serfs to do this. So this idea of the tragedy of the commons was like, oh, we can't have everybody using it. so just only the rich people can use it, and that's
Right.
the same. So there, when you look at the evidence, there is no tragedy of the commons,
Well,
like the
wasn't
acequia
there
system.
right? But wasn't there like if everyone could graze their sheep on the common pasture, there was less motivation. This is what I understand for the tragedy of the common. Less motivation to not overgraze, because if you don't overgraze when you have your sheep out there, you're worried that the next guy coming along is going to overgraze. And so you have more motivation to overgraze because it helps your sheep today even though it's bad for the pasture in the future.
That's the tragedy of the commons, is that that people are inherently selfish and someone's going to take advantage. But the acequia system, when you actually look at what's the experience of locally managed commons, like the acequia system, you see that doesn't happen.
Right. Well, there are other pressures too, that even if there are selfish people out there, you're a group in a community living in the same tiny little agricultural valley on the acequia. And if someone starts taking water when it's not their turn, or not showing up to help clean the ditch or whatever, there are going to be consequences.
There are going to be consequences, exactly. So this locally managed, resource with people that you're kind of beholden to and you have to see every day is a huge incentive to not be selfish, to have to share everything. And when there is conflict, it gets resolved. I mean, of course, I understand it's not like all roses and hearts and everything,
Right.
There's serious conflict that happens that needs to be resolved. But the fact that it does get resolved, and the fact that more often than not, it doesn't result in, selfish people taking everything.
Yeah. We have to go to another break. You'll be right back. I'm talking to Dr. Wendy Johnson about her life, her practice, and her new book, Kinship Medicine. You're back listening to Coffee and Culture. I'm Matthew Chase Daniel, talking to Dr. Wendy Johnson about her book, Kinship Medicine. And there will be a release launch party for the book at Tumbleroot Brewery on July 15th at 6 p.m. And Tumbleroot is at 2791 Agua Fria. And you'll be talking with Mary Charlotte Domondi.
Mm-hmm.
And then there'll be music by Jordan Wax and friends. And people should get a ticket, and you can get tickets at Hold My Ticket or at the Tumbleroot website, or you can stop by Tumbleroot, and you can get the book at Collected Works. And
after July 15th.
After July 15th.
It releases July 15th. You can go into Collected Works and pre-order the book, and if you're going to come to the launch, you can ask them to have the book for you there, and then I can sign it for you.
They'll be there with the book.
Yeah, they'll have some books for sale, but to make sure you get one, it would be good to pre-order. And then, it'll be a really fun party. It is tickets, but no one will be turned away. But all the ticket sales and a portion of the book sales are going to
Tewa Women United and Amigos Bravos.
Amigos Bravos is an organization that we were just talking about, the acequias, sort of defends and advocates for the acequia system, and maintaining
wild rivers
and wild rivers
Mexico, right?
In general. And Tewa Women United, just a great organization in Espanola in northern New Mexico, sort of working on indigenous rights and cultural issues. So
based out of Espanola, San Ildefonso Pueblo.
Mm-hmm.
And you describe in your book this community garden that they made in Espanola on this sort of dry spot that was not being cared for. Yeah. And now there's trees and gardens and medicinal herbs and
Healing Oasis, called the Healing Oasis Garden. It's really great to visit it. It's right by northern New Mexico Northern College, and it's I think it's maybe like behind the Espanola administrative buildings.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have that right. So
you can find out information. Tewa Women United has a good website, and they do lots of great work, and they're nice people.
They are
making good community.
Mm-hmm.
one in the book you talk about your garden, about moving to Chupadero and having a little plot of land and taking care of it, and the sort of dance and play between growing things for your own consumption and then the interaction with wild animals, be they coyotes or birds or gophers or whatever, and how that can be very frustrating and challenging, but also how you've learned to work with that rather than against that and accept that. And you call it the wild tithe being this religious term of giving 10% of your goods to the church or whatever,
Right.
1/10. And so rather than being in despair about the birds eating the cherries off the tree, you're like, that's my wild tithe. And I like that.
Yeah, I just picked cherries off my tree yesterday, and because they're ripe. But I think about at least half, if not 3/4. I waited too long, probably. You got to get them before they're totally ripe if you want to get more. But about half or 3/4 the birds had already gotten to.
Yeah.
So
Sometimes they just take one bite and leave a big hole in it rather than the whole thing. I wish they'd eat the whole thing.
yeah,
Leave
they're
the one
not
next to it.
efficient that way. They
Yeah.
take one bite of like 10 cherries. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it seems like there's like one day where you get the cherries. They're not quite ripe enough for the birds, but they're ripe enough for
Yep.
us. And if you wait too long, they're very efficient in
I know.
coming in.
I waited too long. In fact, as I was picking, the birds were in the upper branches, sort of like, "What are you doing here? This is our tree."
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're quoting someone else, and I don't think I wrote it down, but about what it is to live in a flock, like a birds, to
Yeah.
fly together. You can't be too far apart. You can't be too close.
Yeah, that was Adrienne Murray Brown. I don't have the quote in front of me right now, but it's about murmuration, about the idea. And I think an example of murmuration were the protests the other day, the No
Yeah.
King's Day protests, just kind of spontaneously over 5 million people kind of coming together and knowing just what we had to do,
Yeah. Yeah.
and all over the country. So that's almost instinctual for birds. And she talks about that. It's like, once we are part of a community, I talk about in the book, I'm not sure if I said this exactly this way, but I think because of being online, because of the way our cities and communities are built that isolate us in these huge sprawling suburbia, places, we've kind of lost our communal muscle. It's kind of atrophied. So we don't have practice in living in community. And I have a friend of mine right now who's been staying with me. He's kind of a refugee from Florida, and he had been living in Florida for a while. And I was showing him about the acequia and just about our community, and he was again making this assumption, oh, it needs to be tightly regulated or somebody's going to like steal it all or something. And I'm like, no, that doesn't happen. He's like, oh, in Florida, there's this immediate suspicion, he was saying, in the community he was living in, like, if you offer something or if you try to be friends with your neighbors, there's this immediate thinking like, oh, what does this person want from me? Or why are they being so friendly? And there's this kind of lack of trust as the baseline. And I think that comes from the fact that we are very unused to altruism and thinking about solidarity and thinking about mutual aid and thinking about, okay, I'm going to share my bounty with you today. And this goes to the natural world too, because I have more cherries than I'm going to eat or whatever. And tomorrow I might need something.
Yeah.
And so I can borrow it. And, I'm very lucky to live. I think a lot of New Mexico communities are like this and still have this sense of community, but I think we've lost it in a lot of the country.
Yeah.
So it's very sad.
Yeah, it is. Does still hold true in New Mexico, I think.
Yeah.
More than other places.
Yeah.
I think that's true. Something else I read in your book, you say for every human gene in our bodies, there are 360 microbial ones, and the cells of microorganisms outnumber our human cells 10 to 1. And I've heard this somewhere before, but explain what that.
Well, I think the major impetus in writing the book comes from this realization that I've had over my career as a doctor, that we see health in our culture as an individual thing.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have learned is that it's not. It's a communal thing. So we as individuals can't really be healthy if we're in ecosystems that are not healthy and that are sick and suffering. And your own body is the most basic example of that, because we think of ourselves as individual organisms, but we're not. You couldn't survive as an individual if you didn't have this like plethora of all kinds of beings living inside and on top of you. You would die.
Right.
So you're not an individual in any kind of real sense of the word. You are an ecosystem.
Right.
And you can't survive when your ecosystem of your individual body is not, you can't be healthy if your ecosystem is not healthy.
Right.
So that is your microbiome, you know, and when I was in medical school 30 years ago, we learned really nothing about the microbiome. Maybe a tiny bit about there's some bugs in your gut, maybe a tiny bit about, yeast infections being an overgrowth of bacteria, but only in the sense of what could go wrong. We never learned how to nurture a healthy microbiome, or that there even was such a thing as a healthy microbiome. And
the microbiome's not just, it's large, a lot of it's in your gut, in your intestines, in your stomach, your digestive tract, but there's also microbiomes in our skin and our in our sinuses. And
right. Yeah, no, everywhere. And all over you, like I said. And a lot of things that we do ostensibly for health or for cleanliness actually disorders our microbiome. A lot.
Right, you're talking about all these these soaps that are antibacterial.
Yeah.
Get rid of the bacteria. Bacteria are bad. All of that.
Yeah. So, of course, even, we talk about pesticides and stuff like that in the environment, and chemicals and processed foods and things like that are not great. But you can recharge your microbiome also through gardening or even hiking in the woods. Even breathing in air in a natural environment helps.
Brings in.
Yeah.
Yeah. We got to go to our last break. We'll be right back with Dr. Wendy Johnson. You're back listening to Coffee and Culture. We're on AM 1260 and FM 103.7, streaming at santafe.com. Find Coffee and Culture or KTRC there, or podcasts at chasedaniel.com or elsewhere. Dr. Wendy Johnson's new book, Kinship Medicine, comes out July 15th, and there's a launch party at Tumbleroot. You can go to their website to get tickets and find out more information. It's at 6 p.m. But you're also doing talking and presenting in other places.
Yeah, it's developing. I'm, starting with Tumbleroot on July 15th, which is the launch day. And then July 17th, I will be at Bookworks in Albuquerque. I think that starts at 6 p.m. Down there. And then I will, in the beginning of August, I'll be in Cleveland, Columbus, Toledo, and Detroit, where it's kind of, when people ask me where I'm from, I often say I'm from Lake Erie, because I'm born in Buffalo.
Those towns?
Yeah, I was born in Buffalo and then grew up in Cleveland and Toledo. And then I'm going to be in the beginning of September in Minneapolis and Seattle. Also in there, not dates, I don't have the dates hammered down yet, but I will be in DC probably in late July, and in Portland at Powell's. I'm very excited to be at Powell's in I think August. Yeah. So, and probably LA and maybe a couple other places. We'll see.
And will there be information online?
My website is wendyjohnsonmd.com. and I will be updating all my tour dates there. So
Excellent.
that's probably the best place to go to find that. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you
Also, if you go to wendyjohnson.com, or I'm sorry, wendyjohnsonmd.com, wendyjohnsonmd.com,
okay?
you can sign up for a little newsletter, and I'll email you when I add a new date. Or you can also email me and say, hey, come to my town somewhere. I'll probably be doing a lot of other places, little smaller places. I'll probably be going to Taos and maybe Southern Colorado and, some other places. Folks at the Placitas Library, I think, wanted me to come, and some other
Nice.
small places. So
Nice.
you can keep in touch through the website.
Yeah. Oh, one thing we were talking before about our microbial life inside of us, and you invoke terroir, which is often used for like wine or different foods that are local to a place, and they grow in a certain soil and they impart the flavor of that place. And that you're saying as humans, whether it's where our ancestors are from or where we live, are also sort of part of that terroir.
Yeah, this is kind of my own little theory I've developed, and I don't have a lot of evidence for it, but it makes logical sense to me. When you think about evolution and you think about our ecosystems, our bodies evolved with a place. We evolved with a place. It's only been the last 200-300 years that we've been able to move around the earth very quickly.
Right.
Before that, it was basically on foot or a horse or maybe a ship. Okay.
Right.
So all of our evolution happened pretty stationary, connected to a place and the other microbes that were in a place. So my grandparents come from Italy. My grandmother grew up in the Alps of northern Italy. And I think when we're that close to where our ancestors are from, northern New Mexico, we have the thing about green chili, right? You have stuff. I have certain things, certain flavors, certain even smells that make me feel at home, even though they're from northern Italy, like a place that I've never personally lived.
Well, is it partly like evolution? Like the people who thrive in that place are living on those foods,
right,
and they're adapted to your body because your body has been slowly changing and optimizing itself for generations.
There's some evidence for this, like lactose intolerance, and who developed the genes for lactose, being able to digest lactose, are in cultures where there was a lot of dairy, for example, or the idea of sickle cell and malaria. Sickle cell and the genes for sickle cell were actually adaptive to be able to resist malaria. So people who have sickle cell, it came because you were evolving with these microbes, in this case, dangerous microbes.
Wait, you get sickle cell, but you don't get malaria?
Well, if you're heterozygous for sickle cell, which means that you only get one sickle cell gene, that is protective. It makes you more resistant to getting malaria.
Oh, interesting.
So that gene for sickle cell often comes from people who have ancestors that came from places that had high rates of malaria, and it was developed as kind of a protective measure.
Right.
So my theory isn't completely out of left field. There's some evidence that this is true, but I think it must go beyond lactose intolerance and sickle cell. There must be other things, like the way your body responds to certain other kinds of foods, or that your likes and dislikes, or just your digestive system, and things like even your humidity levels. We adapt to them here in New Mexico. Most people, after living here, but when we have relatives that come or friends that come from the East Coast, and they're like, "Oh my God, how do you survive here? It's so dry."
Yeah, I met a youngish woman the other day who just moved from North Carolina here. I can tell you just got here because your skin is still all not all dry, cracked, and wrinkly.
Right. So I think that we have put our genes and our microbes in a blender of mixing from all different kinds of places in just the last couple of 100 years, I don't think evolution can keep up with it.
Right.
So,
And that creates both benefits, potential benefits, and potential difficulties, right?
right,
Things that we're not yet adapted to
right.
take us down. But over time, as we get exposed to all these different things from all over,
Yeah, definitely
we
can make us
evolve
stronger too. Yeah.
be stronger.
So,
Well, we still have a little time, but just sort of the book. It's about medicine, and it's about your experience as a doctor. And a lot of what sort of the takeaway from it is like medicine is important, but a lot of medicine ignores what's important, which is community and for well-being. And community means both, like you're saying, the community of the millions of people who came out this last weekend, but also a community of the coyote who comes past your house, and the bees and birds and clouds and rocks and all the things around us that are essential to the well-being of the planet. And we talk of people have been talking for a long time about climate change and the well-being of the planet. We need to look at this global thing. It's not just my carbon emissions that affect me. Mine affect everyone, and yours affect mine. And so that's very important, but it's not only important for some sort of big thing that's hard to conceive of, being the health of the planet or climate change, but it's also good for us personally.
yeah.
That we need to live in that community.
Yeah.
And be aware of that, and look, like you're talking about, being up at Ghost Ranch and walking and seeing things differently on your way back, and we look out at the desert here, and from afar it looks sort of dry and desolate sometimes, and then you go walk into it and you see the subtle interactions and the life that's really there.
Yeah. I mean, I think a couple of things I want to say about, just to wrap up, but one thing I want to make sure we say is that these ideas, and I credit in my book, are really ancient ideas that mostly have come from indigenous populations.
Yeah.
And so I totally, talk about there's many indigenous leaders that I talk about in the book. Robin Wall Kimmerer and Enrique Salmon and Nick Estes are a few. But, these ideas were buried. They tried to kill them off as much as they tried to kill off and commit genocide against indigenous peoples. And we desperately need them back to survive. I believe that even if we solved the carbon problem tomorrow, we would not be able to solve our survival problem on Earth, because we would not be able to solve the problems of biodiversity loss and all of that if we don't change our way of living.
Yeah.
And that's got to start at the local level, with people rebuilding those communities with their human counterparts and their other than human counterparts as well.
Yeah.
So that's the central message.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for writing this and coming here today and talking about it. And I wish you the best of luck as the release happens and the book is out in the world. And thank you.
Thanks. It's great to be here.